During the Second World War, a number of horrific war crimes were committed by the militaries who were fighting in the conflict. The Germans conducted scores of war crimes, and the most horrific include the shootings by the Einsatzgruppen, and the imprisonment of millions and extermination of them in concentration camps. There were millions killed in German war crimes, and still today evidence of many of these have not been uncovered, and there are mass graves littered around Europe, hiding the crimes of different armies. One German atrocity that occurred happened in the aftermath of a mass escape attempt in which 500 Soviet prisoners of war tried to escape from the Muhlviertler subcamp. This belonged to the Mauthausen complex, which itself was the site of where 90,000 people died from execution, starvation, ill treatment and disease. However, the pursuit of those inmates who escaped became known as the Muhlviertler rabbit hunt, as within 3 weeks of the escape, most of the escapees had been executed. So join us today as we look at the brutal executions of the Muhlviertler rabbit hunt. Remember to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. On the 2nd of March 1944, Action Kugel was decreed and issued by Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel. In this, it was a secret decree that stated that any escaped Allied prisoners of war, especially those who were officers or senior NCOs, should be handed over to the SD. The SD were then given instruction to execute those escapees immediately. There was an exemption made to this decree for American and British soldiers who managed to flee camps, and it was said that their case would be looked at individually, and this later did change to include British prisoners of war, following the Great Escape from Stalag Luft 3. This decree led to thousands being executed, and it's been estimated that between 1,300 and over 5,000 people were executed in the wake of the escape order, and the majority of these prisoners were from the Soviet Union. Less questions were asked with regards to escaped Soviet prisoners of war, and for this they were shot instantly. To escape a concentration camp or a prisoner of war camp was seen by the Germans as a very serious thing. Those who managed to get out and were captured were often dealt with incredibly brutally. For example, Mala Zimmerbaum, who along with her boyfriend escaped Auschwitz, and they were then executed in public. Her boyfriend was hanged in front of hundreds of other prisoners, and Mala herself, as she defied right up until the very end, was even it's rumoured to have been cremated alive on the orders of Maria Mandel, a horrific concentration camp guard. Those who managed to escape and never be recaptured told of the horrific treatment inside of the concentration camps, but the Nazis used different methods to execute those escapees. Hitler viewed the Soviets as the worst of the worst in terms of his enemies, as he saw Bolshevism and communism as the direct enemies of Nazism. Because of this, Soviet POWs were known to have been treated terribly, and also many were executed in public for resistance or defiance inside of the camps. When Field Marshal Keitel issued Action Kugel, he stated that escaped Soviet officers were to be transported from their place of imprisonment en masse to Mauthausen. Mauthausen itself was known as being one of the most disturbing camps within the Third Reich, with the main camp being based near a quarry, where prisoners were forced to conduct back-breaking work on a daily basis with little food. Because of the decree, 5,700 Soviet officers were then transported there. Many of those who were sent there did not manage to enter the barbed wire fences, as upon being offloaded from the trucks or the train, they were shot indiscriminately. Those prisoners who found themselves imprisoned at Mauthausen were then transported to the Muhlviertler subcamp, and were then transported inside of block number 20. Block 20 was heavily guarded, as it was isolated from the rest of the camp by a 2.5 metre fence topped with barbed wire, and also along the perimeter fence protecting the block were 3 towers. Inside of these were guards armed with machine guns who would fire at prisoners for any indiscretion. The prisoners inside of block 20 were kept off record too, and they were not registered, and they were treated terribly. They were given hardly any food, roughly a quarter of what other prisoners at Mauthausen were given, in which the rations given in the main camp itself were inadequate. The conditions inside the specific block were incredibly basic, as there was no heating and there was no windows or bunks. Prisoners were forced to be locked inside in the dark with no beds, sleeping on the floor, and the block was also very overcrowded and cramped. Because of this, it was very easy for disease to spread. The SS officers treated the prisoners with such disdain. During one clean-up of the barrack, which was hosed down with water, They forced into the middle of winter the prisoners to lie on the wet floor. Whilst this happened, the SS men walked on them in their boots, as they did not want to get their boots dirty, showing that they would rather trample on the prisoners. In terms of the daily activities of Block 20, they were not really allowed to do any other work with other prisoners. Instead, they were forced to spend all day completing exercise drills, including running around non-stop the barrack block. It was considered the death barrack, and at the time it held around 1,800 prisoners. Each day up to 20 people died, such was the harshness, and at the end of January 1945, with the war turning against the Germans, only 570 Soviet prisoners remained inside of Block 20. But this is where they began to plan a huge mass escape attempt. Under the cover of nightfall and darkness on February 2nd, 1945, around 500 prisoners from Block 20 decided to make a break for it. They used fire extinguishers from the barracks along with blankets and boards from the wooden huts to launch at the towers, and one group attacked a watchtower whilst the wet blankets and clothing were attached to the electrified fence. This created a short circuit and allowed prisoners to then climb the fence. The escape attempt was done over a few hours, and 419 prisoners managed to escape the grounds of the camp, but a number were too weak to get to the woods on the outskirts. The winter's evening also slowed them down, as snow was all around. Once the escape attempt was realised, the SS guards then tried to stop as many as they could, and they did manage to shoot a number of those who escaped with their machine guns, including those who collapsed from exhaustion. These were dying people who were willing to give their lives for one possible attempt at freedom, as they were going to die inside of the camp anyway. The SS camp commandant ordered a huge search of the local area, and it convinced local people to help hunt down the escapees. The Soviet prisoners were also hunted by SA groups, members of the Hitler Youth, and also the Wehrmacht. For the commandant, the escape attempt was a disgrace on his record, and he was furious that anyone could escape his watch. The SS ordered also that the gendarmerie should not bring anyone back to the camp alive, ordering the execution of anyone who was captured. This led to a huge hunting squad, armed with rifles and guns and in a sense stalking their targets who were unarmed, in basic clothing and hiding to survive in the winter's cold. It was the hunting versus the hunted. As the days went on, more and more of the escapees were hunted, and the commandant's orders to not bring anyone back alive was adhered to. It was quite clear who was an escapee due to their clothes and emaciated state, and once they were captured they were killed in brutal ways. Some were firstly beaten savagely by the guards, sometimes to death, before being shot. But when the escapees realised they were found, they often ran and were shot dead like game or deer. Around 40 murdered corpses were taken to a nearby town, where the search was being coordinated from, and it was said that the corpses were stacked in a pile, like the bag at an autumn hunt, drawing comparisons once again to hunting. Those people who brought prisoners back alive to Mauthausen were often angrily told off for not having beaten them to death instead. Around 300 survived the first night, and 57 returned to the camp, but over the course of 3 weeks searching, it was estimated that over 300 had been executed. It's estimated that over 480 people were shot in the wake of the escape attempt, but only 11 managed to escape and survive the war. A number of local families and civilians sheltered those who escaped and even brought them food who were hiding inside of the woods. This was incredibly risky, as if they were found doing this, the families also would have been killed. 3 months later the war ended, and these 11 were free. Following the war, Hugo Toscher, a Wehrmacht officer, was convicted for his role in the executions and was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but today a memorial to the escapees marks the massacre. The Muhlviertler rabbit hunt was seen as a horrific war crime, in which around 500 tried to escape, but ultimately more than 489 Soviet POWs were executed. There were less than a dozen who survived, and it's remembered today as a unique mass escape attempt that occurred at one of the harshest concentration camps used in the Third Reich. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.